Just days before the 2026 World Cup begins, a small story appeared in the headlines. The South African national team encountered difficulties related to international travel procedures ahead of the tournament. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than an administrative issue, a delay, a logistical complication, the kind of problem that could happen at any major sporting event. But what made it noteworthy was the timing. The 2026 World Cup has been promoted as the biggest World Cup in history. Millions of fans are expected to cross international borders to follow the tournament. Everything was supposed to operate like a machine that had been carefully prepared for years. Yet before a single ball has been kicked, questions have already begun to emerge. Not just about the teams, but about the fans, about travel, about accessibility, and about the experience FIFA promised when hosting rights were awarded to the United States, Canada, and Mexico in 2018. Now, as opening day draws closer, more and more people are asking a simple question. What is really happening behind the scenes of the biggest tournament in FIFA history? When FIFA awarded the hosting rights for the 2026 World Cup to the United States, Canada, and Mexico in 2018, the decision was widely viewed as close to perfect. 3 countries, dozens of modern stadiums, advanced transportation networks, and one of the largest tourism markets in the world. For FIFA, this was not just another World Cup. It was an opportunity to expand the tournament to 48 national teams and transform the World Cup into the biggest sporting event ever staged. Economic projections quickly followed. Millions of international visitors, billions of dollars in revenue, stadiums packed with fans from the opening match all the way to the final. For years, the story surrounding the 2026 World Cup seemed straightforward. A bigger tournament, more national teams, more fans, and more money. But there was one thing FIFA could not control: time. Since 2018, the world has changed. The pandemic reshaped travel habits. Travel costs climbed sharply. Debates over immigration and border security became more intense. And the political environment in the primary host nation is no longer the same as it was when the tournament was originally awarded. That is when a new question began to emerge. If this plan was built for the world of 2018, is it still compatible with the reality of 2026? When a World Cup begins to face challenges, the first reaction often appears in a place that very few people pay attention to. Not in the stadiums, not on television, and not on social media, but in hotels. Years before a World Cup begins, the hospitality industry is usually one of the first sectors to feel the heat of the tournament. Rooms get booked in advance. Prices start to rise. Businesses prepare for a wave of international visitors. That has been the pattern for almost every modern World Cup. But ahead of the 2026 World Cup, some reports have pointed to a different signal. Some tourism and hotel businesses in host cities have indicated that booking levels have not yet reached their original expectations. That does not mean the World Cup will fail, but it does raise an important question. If demand is truly expected to surge, why does the market still seem cautious? There are several possible explanations. International travel costs are significantly higher today than they were in 2018. Airfare, hotels, everyday living expenses, all of them have risen substantially in recent years. For many fans, attending the World Cup is no longer just about buying a match ticket. It has become an investment that can easily cost several $1,000s. And as costs increase, the number of people who can realistically make the trip naturally becomes smaller. That is exactly why market signals matter. Hotels do not care about debates on social media. They do not care about FIFA press conferences. What they care about is the number of guests who actually book rooms. In other words, they see real behavior rather than projections on paper. And when the market begins to slow, analysts often view it as a signal worth watching. Because in every major sporting event, final revenue ultimately depends on one very simple thing: how many people actually show up. And That is where the next question begins to emerge. If the issue is not just about cost, could there be something else making fans hesitate before the 2026 World Cup? If the first part of this story is about money, then the second part is about something even more important. Certainty. Most international trips are planned months in advance. Fans have to book flights, reserve hotels, request time off from work, and prepare their budgets. Everything depends on one simple assumption: that they will be able to get where they want to go. But ahead of the 2026 World Cup, discussions surrounding visas, entry procedures, and border controls have become increasingly common. Some advocacy groups have issued warnings for international travelers. Debates have emerged over the role of immigration enforcement agencies during major sporting events. At the same time, local and federal officials have occasionally delivered messages that are not always perfectly aligned. And that is the real issue. Not because everyone will face difficulties entering the country, but because nobody likes uncertainty. In the travel industry, uncertainty always comes with a cost. A fan may be willing to pay a high ticket price. They may accept a long flight. They may even accept expensive hotel rates. But the hardest thing to accept is spending thousands of dollars while still feeling unsure about the overall journey. That is why many travel experts argue that perception can be just as important as reality. Even if the vast majority of visitors ultimately enter without any problems, ongoing controversies can still influence the decisions of people who are considering the trip. And that creates an interesting effect. The 2026 World Cup may still attract billions of television viewers. But convincing fans to actually board a plane is an entirely different challenge. Because football runs on emotion, international travel runs on confidence. And when confidence begins to be questioned, many people choose the safest option available: stay home, watch from a screen, save thousands of dollars. Not because they do not love football, but because they do not like risk. And that is where this story moves beyond economics and logistics. It begins to touch on something much bigger: value. At this stage, the story begins to change. We are no longer talking about hotels, no longer talking about ticket prices, and no longer talking only about visas. Because the biggest debates surrounding the 2026 World Cup are becoming less about football itself. Instead, they are about values. In the months leading up to the tournament, a variety of organizations and advocacy groups have raised concerns about different issues, from immigrant rights to LGBTQ rights, from the domestic political climate to geopolitical tensions involving participating nations. Any one of these debates on its own may not be enough to create a crisis. But when all of them emerge at the same time, the picture becomes far more complicated. FIFA has maintained a relatively consistent message. The World Cup is for everyone, a global celebration that transcends borders, languages, and political differences. It is a powerful idea, and for decades, it has been a major part of what makes the World Cup so appealing. But ideals and public perception are not always the same thing. Some groups of fans believe they need stronger assurances. Some human rights organizations argue that important questions remain unanswered. Meanwhile, others believe many of these concerns are being overstated. And that is exactly what makes the debate so difficult to resolve. Because this is no longer a matter of absolute right or wrong. It is a matter of trust. If fans feel welcomed, they will come. If they feel uncertain, they will think twice. It is really that simple. What makes this particularly significant is that these debates do not affect only the people who plan to attend matches. They also influence how the entire world views the tournament. Media headlines, social media discussions, statements and warnings from international organizations. All of these factors help shape the image of the World Cup before the competition has even begun. And that may be the most important question of all. Who is controlling the narrative surrounding the 2026 World Cup? FIFA? The host governments? Or the controversies unfolding beyond the football pitch? To answer that question, we need to look back at history. because this is far from the first time FIFA has entered a World Cup surrounded by major controversy. If you look only at today's headlines, it would be easy to believe that the 2026 World Cup is facing challenges unlike anything seen before. But history tells a different story. Before the 2010 World Cup, South Africa faced concerns about security. Before the 2014 World Cup, Brazil experienced large-scale protests over public spending related to the tournament. The 2018 World Cup in Russia took place amid significant geopolitical controversy, and the 2022 World Cup in Qatar was overshadowed by debates surrounding migrant labor, human rights, and LGBTQ rights. Every World Cup has faced pessimistic predictions, warnings, controversies, and questions about FIFA's reputation. Yet when the first ball was kicked, billions of people still watched. The stadiums were still packed, and the World Cup remained the biggest sporting event on the planet. That is why it is important to view the 2026 World Cup through a balanced lens. The concerns being raised today are real, but FIFA also has a long history of navigating major controversies. However, that does not mean every controversy is the same. Because if we look more closely, there is one important difference between the situation today and what we have seen in previous tournaments. This time, many of the barriers appear before fans ever reach a stadium. In some cases, before they even board a plane. And that may prove to be the biggest difference between the 2026 World Cup and the World Cups that came before it. This may be the biggest difference surrounding the 2026 World Cup. In the past, most controversies revolved around things that fans could not control. FIFA's decisions, political issues, media debates. But in the end, fans could still buy a ticket, board a plane, arrive at the stadium, and become part of the tournament. This time, the story feels a little different. The issues we have discussed are directly affecting the decision-making process of fans themselves. Higher costs, greater uncertainty, more questions, and fewer clear answers. A fan can accept that a World Cup may be controversial. That has happened before. What is much harder to accept is spending a significant amount of money while still feeling uncertain about the overall experience. That is why many observers believe the biggest challenge facing the 2026 World Cup is not on the pitch. It is the journey before fans ever reach the pitch. Because a seat inside a stadium is filled only when someone decides to make the trip. And today, that decision has become far more complicated than FIFA likely imagined back in 2018. None of this means that the 2026 World Cup is destined to fail. Far from it. The tournament still possesses advantages that almost no other sporting event in the world can match. And that is precisely why there is another side to this story. A more optimistic side. Because despite every controversy, despite every debate, and despite every unanswered question, the World Cup is still the World Cup. Of course, it would be a mistake to view the 2026 World Cup only through the lens of today's controversies. History shows that the World Cup has a remarkable ability to move beyond crises. South Africa faced concerns about security. Brazil faced widespread protests. Qatar faced intense debates over human rights. Yet when the tournaments began, football became the center of attention. The 2026 World Cup may follow a similar path. Canada brings stability. Mexico brings football passion. The United States brings infrastructure and scale that very few nations can match. And above all, the World Cup remains the most compelling sporting event on the planet. But even if the tournament succeeds in terms of revenue, television audiences, and stadium attendance, one important question will still remain. What will be the true legacy of the 2026 World Cup? Will it be remembered as the World Cup that shattered every record for size and ambition? Or will it serve as a reminder that access to global events is becoming increasingly difficult for ordinary fans? Because in the end, FIFA is not simply managing a football tournament. It is managing a dream that millions of people around the world hope to experience at least once in their lives. So what do you think? Are the issues we have discussed simply the normal growing pains of the biggest World Cup in history? Or are they signs of a much larger shift taking place? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoy in-depth analysis of the 2026 World Cup and the stories shaping the tournament behind the scenes, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next discussion.